Despite losing the popular vote, Trump won the election in 2016 and sworn into office on January 20th, 2017.
And we will make America great again.
We'll walk through his first 1,300 days of presidency to see what he had done, plus some major events that took place during his term. On his first day, he wasted no time to sign his first executive order, which set out interim procedures in anticipation of repealing
the disaster known as Obamacare.
3.5 years later, how did it go? Among other cuts, he was able to neutralize the individual mandate, which was the least popular provisions in Obamacare. It's had its close call in the summer of 2017, but Obamacare lived to fight another several years. On to another election promise. He withdrew US from the TPP, or what he deemed a job-killing trade agreement, on the fourth day in office. 2 days later, Trump signed an executive order in the attempt to build a great
wall along the southern border. And Mexico will pay for the wall.
That beautiful wall was to stretch almost 2,000 miles coast to coast, blocking all land passages to the US from Mexico to curb illegal immigrants. So, what's the status so far? As of August 2020, due to budget constraint and lawsuits, only 265 miles were completed, of which 5 miles were new walls that had never existed. The remaining 260 miles were improvement work on existing structures. On the 321st day, Trump announced that the US is to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the first nation to do so, and announced that the US will relocate its embassy there from Tel Aviv. 2 weeks after, Trump signed the controversial Tax Cuts and Jobs Act into law. The most notable, among other cuts, was the lowering of corporate tax. Trump argued that the tax incentives will bring companies back home, along with new job openings. The corporate tax break will also theoretically trickle down to workers' wage, while others argued that the tax break simply went straight into stock buybacks, which only inflated the stock market. All in all, opinions are still mixed. On the 357th day, Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on China for its theft of intellectual property and deep trade imbalance. The two countries have been embroiled in tit-for-tat escalation before a Phase 1 trade agreement was signed in 2 years. For the better part of the following 2 years, Trump was engaged in a series of foreign affairs, including the withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, achieving military success in the Middle East, more escalation with China, becoming the first US president to ever set foot in North Korea, and withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. We won't get into details for the sake of keeping an eye on the video length. By the end of 2019, though, all eyes were back on the home front.
Article 1 is adopted.
We do have breaking news tonight. President Trump has just been impeached on both Article 1, abuse of power, and on Article 2, obstruction of Congress.
Trump was accused of abusing his presidential power for personal political gain by pressuring Ukraine to dig up dirt on Joe Biden and his son. He was impeached by the Democrat-controlled House, becoming the third president in US history to ever get impeached. Democrats failed to get 2/3 of the votes, though, in a Republican-controlled Senate. As a result, Trump was able to stay in office. Trump's presidency is about to get even more eventful. On the day following New Year, Iranian Major General Qasem Soleimani was killed in an airstrike on Trump's order, which brought US-Iran tensions to new heights. In this month, 2 trade deals were signed, including the USMCA, one of his campaign goals. Trump soon racked up some economic milestones. Some argued he rode on an uptrend, others thought his policies enabled it. But the landfall of coronavirus only made his legacy all the more distorted. A week after the nationwide lockdown was imposed, US led the world in confirmed cases. The House passes the landmark $2 trillion CARES Act on the following day, and was signed into law immediately. It will go down in history as the largest economic rescue package. It includes sending checks directly to citizens and small businesses, also large-scale industry bailouts and more. On May 25, 2020, George Floyd, a 46-year-old Black American man, was killed in police custody in Minneapolis. It infuriated the nation. As a response, nationwide protests broke out, which revitalized the Black Lives Matter movement. After banning TikTok and WeChat, 2 of the most popular Chinese mobile apps, The US imposed sanction on 11 Hong Kong and mainland officials on the 1,296th day, including Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie Lam, as part of a punishment for their roles in the enforcement of the city's national security law. In mid-September, Trump signed the Abraham Accords, normalizing ties between Israel, UAE, and Bahrain.
Will now sign the Declaration of Peace.
Of course, this is in no way an exhaustive timeline. These are merely what stood out in his first 1,300 days in office. Whether these events brought a positive or negative impact, whether the president caused it or inherited it, depends entirely on your own interpretation. Implications of these could be argued both ways. It's crucial to fairly weigh individual outcomes against intentions and avoid shaping your opinions around the wrong reasons. So, is he on the right track to making America great again? You be the judge. If you learned something new in this video, click subscribe and the bell icon to get notified for similar weekly interesting content. For instance, why do Israelis and Palestinians hate each other? Click on last week's video and I'll break it to you straight in 7 minutes. If there are specific topics you want me to cover, comment below. See you next week.